A uniform doesn't grant you class. A badge doesn't give you character. On a bustling morning at JFK International, two women, both professionals in the aviation industry, are about to have their lives intersect in a way that will change them forever. One, a senior flight attendant named Brenda, sees a young black woman and makes a snap judgment, a decision rooted in a prejudice she'd never admit she has. The other first officer, Naomi Carter, is about to teach her a lesson in altitude and attitude she will never forget. This isn't just a story about a misunderstanding. It's a story about the quiet poison of bias, the explosive power of truth, and the undeniable force of consequence when it finally comes hurtling back down to earth from 35,000 feet. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport had a unique texture. It was a chaotic symphony of rolling luggage wheels, multilingual announcements, and the faint, ever-present scent of jet fuel and overpriced coffee. For First Officer Naomi Carter, it was the smell of home. At 28, she was younger than most in her position, a fact that was a source of both immense pride and quiet frustration. Her wings, pinned meticulously to her crisp white pilot's shirt, felt heavier some days than others. This morning was one of those days. She was operating Transatlantic Flight 88, a behemoth Boeing 777, on its daily run from New York to London Heathrow. It was a prestigious route, the kind she'd dreamed of as a little girl, watching documentaries about her grandfather, a decorated member of the Tuskegee Airmen. He had flown with courage in the face of a world that told him he was less than, and Naomi carried that legacy, not as a burden, but as a fuel source. She'd chosen to wear a simple professional black blazer over her uniform shirt for the walk through the terminal. The captain's jacket was already hanging neatly in the cockpit, and the blazer felt less conspicuous. It allowed her to blend in to observe the river of humanity flowing around her. She checked her watch. 08:15. Boarding would commence in an hour, but her work had started long ago. The flight plan was reviewed, weather systems, analyzed fuel loads, calculated. Now came the physical pre-flight, the part of the ritual she cherished. The walk around the tactile connection with the magnificent machine she was entrusted with. She arrived at Gate C34, a bustling hub of activity. Passengers were already congregating, a nervous energy fluttering among them. Naomi gave a polite nod to the gate agent Susan, who recognized her and buzzed her through the crew access door. The jet bridge was a sterile tube, a temporary umbilical cord connecting the terminal to the aircraft. At the threshold of the plane's open door stood a flight attendant. She was an older woman, perhaps in her late 50s, with meticulously coiffed blonde hair that seemed immune to the laws of physics and humidity. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture ramrod straight. A name tag on her lapel read, Brenda. She was the very picture of seniority, of someone who had seen it all and was impressed by none of it. She was currently directing a catering crew with an air of weary authority. Naomi approached, her crew bag slung over her shoulder. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and friendly. Brenda turned her eyes, doing a swift, dismissive scan. They took in Naomi's blazer, her youthful face, her dark skin, and the intricate braids that fell past her shoulders. The assessment was instantaneous, and the conclusion was foregone. Brenda's smile was thin, a mere stretching of the lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," Brenda replied, her tone dripping with a cloying, condescending sweetness. "I'm afraid priority boarding for first classes hasn't started just yet. The waiting area is back out in the terminal." Naomi blinked. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. "Excuse me, you'll have to wait," Brenda continued, turning slightly, to block the entrance, a subtle but unmistakable gesture. "We need to finish getting the cabin ready. We'll call boarding by groups. It's all very organized. You can just wait at the back of the line for now." She even gestured with her thumb over her shoulder towards the gate. "With the others." The phrase hung in the air, thick and foul. With the others. The implication was as clear as the plexiglass window on the jet bridge. Naomi felt a familiar hot flush of anger creep up her neck. It was an old companion, this feeling. It had visited her in flight school, in simulator tests, in conversations with male colleagues who mistook her for a cabin crew member. But this was different. This was more blatant, more dismissive. The woman hadn't even considered the possibility. Naomi took a slow, deliberate breath, channeling her grandfather's calm. Making a scene on the jet bridge was unprofessional. It would delay the flight and create exactly the kind of drama this woman seemed to believe Naomi was capable of. The uniform underneath her blazer suddenly felt like armor she had chosen not to show. A strategic error, perhaps. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Naomi said, keeping her voice even, betraying none of the firestorm in her chest. "Oh, I don't think so, honey," Brenda said the final word, a sharp, patronizing jab. "The rules are for everyone's safety and comfort. Now, if you'll excuse me." She turned her back fully, dismissing Naomi, as if she were a fly to be swatted away. Naomi stood frozen for a second. The insult was so profound, so casual, it had almost taken her breath away. She could have reached into her bag, pulled out her airline-issued ID, and watched the smugness drain from Brenda's face. But a different idea, a colder, more patient one, began to form in her mind. Some lessons, she decided, were best taught, not with a quick retort, but with the slow, undeniable dawn of reality. She spotted a younger flight attendant, Chloe, coming up the jet bridge with a stack of newspapers. Chloe had wide, observant eyes and looked to be in her early 20s. Naomi stepped towards her. "Excuse me," Naomi said, her tone shifting back to professional warmth. She opened her blazer just enough to reveal the pilot's shirt and the wings. "First Officer Carter, I need to get to the flight deck to begin my pre-flight checklist." Chloe's eyes widened first at the uniform, then with a flicker of confusion towards Brenda's back. "Oh, yes, of course, ma'am. I'm so sorry. Right this way." She practically scurried ahead to lead the way, throwing a nervous glance over her shoulder at Brenda, who was still busy bossing around the catering staff, oblivious. As Naomi stepped over the threshold and into the galley, she made brief eye contact with Chloe. In that shared glance, a world of understanding passed. Chloe knew what had just happened, and Naomi knew that the curtain had just risen on a very long, very tense flight to London. She walked past the galley, her footsteps silent on the carpeted floor, and headed for the one place on the entire aircraft where Brenda Jensen's authority meant absolutely nothing: the cockpit. The cockpit of a Boeing 777 was Naomi's sanctuary. It was a space of profound complexity and reassuring order. The myriad of screens, switches, and dials that would intimidate most people felt like a familiar language to her. She stowed her blazer and bag, settled into the right-hand seat, and began her flow. Powering up the displays, checking the hydraulic pressures, verifying the oxygen levels. Each flip of a switch, each confirmation on the screen was a small piece of a sacred ritual. A few minutes later, the left-hand seat was occupied by Captain Robert Henderson. Rob was a pilot from the old school in his late 50s, with graying temples and a calm demeanor that had been pressure-tested over 3 decades of flying everything from crop dusters to jumbo jets. He respected skill and professionalism above all else, and from the day Naomi was assigned as his first officer, he had treated her as an equal. "Morning, Naomi," he grunted, settling his large frame into the seat. "See the weather over the North Atlantic? Could be a bit bumpy around Waypoint Gander." "Saw it," Naomi replied, pointing to a swirling pattern on her navigation display. "Looks like we can request a flight level change from oceanic control to climb above the worst of it. I've already penciled in a possible route deviation." Rob glanced at her notes. "Good thinking, always a step ahead." He smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That's why I like flying with you. You do half the work before I've even had my coffee." Their rapport was easy and professional. They worked in tandem, their actions a well-rehearsed ballet of checks and balances. They were a team. About 10 minutes before they were scheduled to push back from the gate, the cockpit door opened. It was Brenda, holding a clipboard with the passenger manifest. The airline's procedure was for the purser, or head flight attendant, to brief the flight crew on any special passenger needs the final passenger count and confirm the cabin was secure. Captain Henderson, she began, her voice the epitome of polished service. The cabin is secure. We have a full flight, 288 souls on board. No special meal requests that weren't pre-filed. And Dr. Evans in C8B is a cardiologist, should we require medical assistance. We are ready for an on-time. Her voice trailed off. Her eyes had finally landed on the person in the right-hand seat. She saw the 4 gold stripes on the epaulets of the uniform shirt, the headset now resting around Naomi's neck, the confident way her hands rested on the controls. She saw First Officer Naomi Carter looking back at her, her expression unreadable, a calm mask of professionalism. Brenda's face went through a rapid series of micro-expressions. First confusion, then a dawning, horrified recognition. Her meticulously applied foundation couldn't hide the sudden stark pallor that washed over her. The blood seemed to drain from her face, leaving her lipstick a garish slash of red. The clipboard in her hand trembled almost imperceptibly. Captain Henderson, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded on his jet bridge, gestured towards Naomi. "Brenda, I don't believe you've been formally introduced to my first officer, Naomi Carter. Naomi, this is Brenda Jensen, our purser for this flight. She runs the tightest cabin in the fleet." The air in the small cockpit became thick and heavy. Brenda's throat worked, but no sound came out. She was staring at Naomi, her mind clearly scrambling to reconcile the young black woman she had dismissed as a wayward economy passenger with the competent uniformed pilot sitting in a position of ultimate authority. Naomi decided to extend a lifeline, a chance for a graceful exit. "It's a pleasure, Brenda," she said, her voice cool and even. "I'm looking forward to a smooth flight with you and your team." It was an out, a simple, "My apologies for the misunderstanding earlier." First officer was all it would have taken, a moment of humility, a recognition of her error. But Brenda Jensen was not a woman who apologized. Apologies were for people who made mistakes, and in her mind, she hadn't made a mistake. She had been tricked somehow, embarrassed. Her pride, a brittle and fearsome thing, wouldn't allow it. She swallowed hard, her composure returning like a steel mask slamming into place. "Of course. First officer," she managed to say the title tasting like ash in her mouth. She avoided Naomi's eyes, directing her words only to the captain. "As I was saying, the cabin is secure. We are ready." Without another word, she turned on her heel and exited the cockpit, closing the reinforced door with a soft but decisive click. Captain Henderson looked over at Naomi. "Is she all right? She looks like she's seen a ghost." Naomi stared ahead through the thick cockpit window at the ground crew preparing for pushback. The initial fleeting sense of satisfaction was already gone, replaced by a familiar, heavy weariness. It wasn't a victory. It was just another Tuesday. "I think," Naomi said softly, "she just saw me." Rob gave her a questioning look, but the call from ground control came through, and their attention was immediately consumed by the complex liturgy of departure. As the powerful engines spooled to life with a deep, resonating hum, Naomi pushed the incident from the forefront of her mind. She had a job to do. 7 hours of intense focus lay ahead of her. But in the back of her mind, a seed of unease had been planted. A woman whose pride had been so thoroughly wounded and who refused to acknowledge her own prejudice was a volatile element on a long-haul flight. The silence from Brenda was not an armistice. It was the quiet before a storm. Once airborne, the aircraft climbed through the clouds into the brilliant, unforgiving sunlight of the upper atmosphere. Below them, New York City shrank to a grey circuit board. For the next 7 hours, the Boeing 777 was its own self-contained world, a metal tube hurtling through the stratosphere at over 5 miles per hour. On the flight deck, a calm professionalism reigned. Naomi and Captain Henderson worked seamlessly, communicating with air traffic control, monitoring the aircraft's systems, and sipping their coffee. In the cabin, however, the atmosphere was decidedly more turbulent. Brenda Jensen was a whirlwind of tense, brittle energy. She moved through the aisles not with the gentle grace of a seasoned flight attendant, but with the sharp, jerky motions of a soldier on patrol. Her smiles to the passengers were tight, her voice sharp. She was hypercritical of her crew, especially Chloe. A magazine left slightly askew in a seat pocket earned Chloe a quiet but vicious reprimand in the galley. A request for an extra pillow was met with a sigh that was just loud enough for the passenger to hear. Chloe found herself walking on eggshells. She knew exactly what was fueling Brenda's foul mood. Several times she saw Brenda glance towards the front of the aircraft, her expression a toxic mixture of resentment and fury. In the rear galley, while preparing the first drink service, Chloe tried to broach the subject with another flight attendant, a veteran named Paul. "Brenda seems on edge today," Chloe ventured carefully. Paul rolled his eyes. "When is she not? She's been gunning for that onshore management position for 5 years. Every flight is an audition, and we're all just props in her little play." "No, this is different," Chloe whispered, leaning closer. "You didn't see what happened at the gate. She thought the first officer was a passenger trying to sneak on early." Paul stopped polishing a glass. "You're kidding me. The F.O. Carter?" Chloe nodded. "Brenda told her to go wait at the back of the line." Paul let out a low whistle. "Ouch. That's bad. No wonder she's breathing fire. Her precious pride took a direct hit." He shook his head. "Well, stay out of her way. When Brenda gets embarrassed, she looks for a target. Don't let it be you." And his advice was sound, but it was too late. Brenda had already decided that this entire situation was somehow Naomi's fault. In her twisted internal logic, Naomi had deliberately created the situation to humiliate her. She should have just said who she was immediately. Brenda thought, slamming a cart drawer shut. Walking on with that blazer, looking like that. "It's unprofessional. She set me up." The real test came about 3 hours into the flight, somewhere over the vast, empty expanse of the Atlantic. A call button chimed insistently from the first-class cabin. It was seat 4A. A middle-aged man was in distress. His face was flushed, he was wheezing, and angry red welts were blooming on his neck and arms. Chloe was the first to respond. "Sir, are you all right?" "I can't breathe," the man gasped. His wife beside him was frantic. "It's the cashews, I told them. No nuts, I have a severe allergy." He must have eaten one from the mixed nut bowl by mistake. His breathing was becoming more ragged, a high-pitched whistling sound. Anaphylactic shock. The most terrifying medical emergency at 35,000 feet. Chloe's training kicked in. "I need the medical kit now," she yelled towards the galley. Brenda arrived on the scene, her face a mask of annoyance that quickly morphed into alarm. She saw the wheezing passenger, the panicked wife, and the escalating chaos. This was not a misplaced magazine. This was a life-or-death situation, hundreds of miles from the nearest hospital. And her authority, built on rules and regulations, began to crumble. "All right, everyone, stay calm," Brenda announced, her voice a little too loud, a little too shrill. "Sir, you need to try and breathe slowly." It was useless textbook advice that did nothing to help the man who was actively suffocating. "We need to use his EpiPen." "It's in his bag," the wife cried, fumbling with the overhead bin. Brenda froze for a fraction of a second. Administering medication was a serious step. What if something went wrong? The liability. The paperwork. Her mind was racing with procedure, not solutions. Up in the cockpit, the emergency call from the cabin chimed. Captain Henderson answered. Chloe's voice came over the intercom, professional, but strained. "Captain, we have a medical emergency in seat 4A. A male passenger is experiencing a severe anaphylactic reaction. We believe it's a nut allergy." Naomi immediately sprang into action. While Henderson communicated with the cabin crew, she was already on the radio, patching through to Medlink, the ground-based medical support service airlines use. Mayday, 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 Transatlantic 88, medical emergency. She broadcast her voice perfectly calm, cutting through the static. She relayed the passenger's symptoms, her words precise and efficient. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, Chloe had retrieved the EpiPen. Brenda was still hesitating. "Are you sure we should wait for the doctor on board? Someone go get the doctor from 8B. But there was no time. The man's lips were turning blue. Over the intercom, a new voice broke through, calm and authoritative. It was Naomi. "Cabin crew, this is the first officer. Medlink confirms immediate administration of epinephrine is advised. The doctor on board should be brought to the patient, but do not delay treatment. Administer the EpiPen now. I am diverting our course towards Shannon Island. Inform me of any change in the passenger's condition." Her voice, clear and decisive, cut through Brenda's panicked indecision. It was an order. Chloe didn't hesitate. She grabbed the EpiPen from the wife, pulled off the safety cap, and firmly jabbed it into the man's outer thigh, right through his trousers, just as she had been trained. Brenda stood by useless. The voice of authority, the voice of calm, the voice of someone who was truly in control of the situation, had come from the cockpit. It had come from the young woman she had tried to send to the back of the plane. In that moment, every passenger in the first-class cabin and all of the crew saw who the real leader was. It wasn't the woman with the immaculate hair and the frosty demeanor. It was the unseen pilot whose calm commands were now their only lifeline. Slowly, after a terrifying minute, the epinephrine began to work. The man's wheezing subsided, and colour began to return to his face. The cardiologist from 8B arrived and took over monitoring his vitals. The immediate crisis was averted. Brenda finally moved, busying herself with fetching water and blankets, trying to reassert her role. But the damage was done. Her authority had evaporated in the thin, pressurized air. She had been a bystander in her own domain, superseded and overshadowed by the very person she held in such contempt. As she walked back to the galley, she felt the eyes of the other crew members on her. It wasn't pity she saw or sympathy. It was a new cutting lack of respect. And deep within her, the simmering resentment began to boil over into something far darker and more dangerous. The rest of the flight to Shannon was a blur of focused activity. Naomi handled the complex communications with Irish air traffic control, coordinating their priority landing, while Captain Henderson flew the aircraft. They touched down on the Irish runway with a smoothness that belied the urgency of their arrival. Paramedics were waiting on the tarmac and whisked the stabilized passenger away to a local hospital. After a 2-hour delay for refueling and paperwork, Flight 88 was back in the air, continuing its journey to London. The atmosphere on the plane had shifted irrevocably. The crew now looked past Brenda for direction, turning instinctively to Chloe or Paul. Brenda retreated into a shell of icy silence. She performed her duties with robotic precision, but her spirit was gone, replaced by a cold, hard knot of fury in her stomach. She didn't blame herself for her hesitation. She blamed Naomi. She blamed her for the condescendingly calm voice over the intercom, for usurping her authority, for turning her own crew against her. In Brenda's mind, Naomi had engineered this entire flight to be a personal humiliation. The seed of resentment planted on the jet bridge at JFK had now grown into a venomous, thorny vine, choking out all reason. They landed at Heathrow, and the flight was finally over. The crew deplaned and headed to their layover hotel. Brenda rode in a separate taxi. In the sterile quiet of her hotel room, overlooking the grey London sprawl, she made a decision. She wasn't going to let this go. She couldn't. Her 58 years of life, her 35-year career, her entire sense of self-worth was built on a foundation of perceived superiority and control. Naomi Carter had threatened that foundation, and for that she had to be punished. She couldn't attack Naomi's flying. The emergency diversion had been executed flawlessly. The landing was perfect. The reports from Medlink would praise the cockpit crew's quick thinking, so she would attack something else, her character. Brenda opened her laptop and pulled up the airline's internal reporting system. She began to type, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was a meticulous writer, and she crafted her complaint with the precision of a surgeon. It was a masterpiece of malicious fiction, woven with just enough truth to seem plausible. She described the initial incident at the gate, but twisted it grotesquely. She wrote that a non-uniformed individual had tried to force her way onto the aircraft before boarding, becoming argumentative and aggressive when challenged. She claimed Naomi had refused to present identification and had used inflammatory language, creating a serious security concern at a critical phase of ground operations. First Officer Carter's demeanor was belligerent and unprofessional, she wrote. Her confrontational attitude created an environment of tension and hostility before we had even left the gate. This instability, I believe, contributed to the panicked atmosphere during the later medical emergency. As purser, I felt my authority was deliberately undermined from the outset, jeopardizing my ability to effectively manage the cabin crew and ensure passenger safety. It was a lie, but a brilliant one. It reframed Naomi's calm confidence as aggression and Brenda's own prejudiced actions as a legitimate security challenge. She was painting herself as the victim, the vigilant employee trying to maintain order in the face of an unruly junior officer. But she knew her word alone might not be enough. She needed corroboration. She needed Chloe. The next morning, before their return flight to JFK, Brenda cornered Chloe in the hotel lobby coffee shop. She put a printed copy of the report on the table between them. "Chloe, dear," Brenda began, her voice a syrupy, dangerous purr. "I've had to file a report about the unpleasantness on yesterday's flight. For the safety of the airline. You were there. You saw how aggressive she was." Chloe stared at the paper, her stomach turning to ice. "Brenda, that's not what happened." She was perfectly calm. "You were the one who—" "Be very careful what you say next." Brenda interrupted, her voice losing its sweetness and taking on a sharp, metallic edge. "You're what, 23? You have your whole career ahead of you. It would be a shame if it were derailed before it even got started. I have been with this airline for 35 years. My word carries weight. I'm filing this report and I'm noting that you were a witness. I can note that you confirmed my account, or I can note that you were insubordinate and complicit in a security breach. It's your choice." It was blatant blackmail. Chloe felt trapped. Her mind raced. Her career, her dreams of seeing the world, the mountain of student loan debt she was still paying off. All of it hung in the balance. She looked at Brenda's cold, expectant eyes. This was a woman who would not hesitate to destroy her. Fear, bitter and suffocating, won out over principle. With a trembling hand, Chloe picked up the pen Brenda offered her. "Where do I sign?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Brenda smiled, a genuine, triumphant smile this time. "Right at the bottom, dear. Just confirming you witnessed the event as described." As Chloe signed her name to the lie, she felt a piece of her own integrity shrivel and die. She had just become a pawn in Brenda's twisted game of revenge, and she knew with a sickening certainty that this would not end well for anyone. Brenda folded the paper, her victory sealed. She had her weapon, and she was ready for war. The return flight to New York was thick with an unspoken tension that was almost a physical presence in the cabin. Naomi and Captain Henderson, unaware of the treacherous report brewing against them, simply noted Brenda's frosty professionalism and Chloe's withdrawn, anxious demeanor. They attributed it to the stress of the previous day's emergency. They landed at JFK on a crisp autumn afternoon and went through the routine post-flight debriefs. It wasn't until the following morning that the bombshell dropped. Both Naomi and Captain Henderson received an identical terse email summoning them to a meeting at the airline's corporate headquarters. The subject line was chilling: Formal inquiry regarding Flight 88. They met in the lobby of the imposing glass tower, a shared look of confusion and concern on their faces. "Any idea what this is about, Rob?" Naomi asked. "Not a clue," the captain grumbled. "Probably some passenger complaining that the movie selection was subpar. Bureaucratic nonsense." But his tone lacked conviction. This felt different. They were escorted to a top-floor conference room with a panoramic view of the runways. Seated at the head of the long polished table was Mr. David Sterling, the Vice President of Flight Operations. He was a stern man with a reputation for being tough but fair. Beside him sat a woman from Human Resources, and on the other side of the table, looking composed and self-righteous, was Brenda Jensen. Chloe was not present. "Captain Henderson, First Officer Carter, thank you for coming in." Mr. Sterling began, his voice devoid of warmth. "We are here to discuss a serious incident report filed by Purser Brenda Jensen concerning your flight from JFK to London 2 days ago." He slid 2 copies of a document across the table. It was Brenda's report. As Naomi read, her initial confusion curdled into disbelief, then white-hot rage. The words on the page were a grotesque caricature of reality. Argumentative and aggressive, refused to present identification, security concern. The lies were so audacious, so complete, they were almost breathtaking. She looked up from the paper and stared directly at Brenda, who met her gaze with a cool, unwavering stare. Captain Henderson finished reading, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He slammed the report down on the table. "David, what is this garbage? This is a complete fabrication. I have never in my 30 years with this airline read such a load of malicious nonsense." "According to this report, Captain," the HR woman interjected softly, "you were not present for the initial confrontation. Purser Jensen states it occurred on the jet bridge before you had boarded. And the report is co-signed by flight attendant Chloe Davis." Mr. Sterling added, his eyes fixed on Naomi. "First Officer Carter, this report alleges you created a hostile and unsafe environment. That is an extremely serious charge. What is your response?" The weight of the accusation settled on Naomi. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding anymore. This was a direct assault on her career, her reputation, her very fitness to fly. Brenda hadn't just been insulted. She had come back with a calculated, venomous strike designed to ground her permanently. Naomi took a deep breath, forcing the tremor of rage out of her voice. She channeled the same icy calm she had used to divert the plane over the Atlantic. "Mr. Sterling, every single allegation in this report regarding my behavior is false. The truth is the exact opposite of what Ms. Jensen has written." She then recounted the events on the jet bridge exactly as they had happened, Brenda's condescending tone, the assumption that she was an economy passenger, the order to wait at the back. She explained that she chose not to escalate the situation, instead showing her IE to another crew member to gain access to the aircraft she was co-piloting. "She's lying," Brenda cut in, her voice ringing with false indignation. "She's twisting the story to cover up her own insubordination." It was her word against Naomi's, a senior 35-year veteran purser against a 28-year-old first officer, and Brenda had an eyewitness signature. The scales of credibility in a corporate world that often valued seniority over truth seemed to be tipping against her. Captain Henderson spoke up, his voice a low growl. "David, I've flown with Naomi for 6 months. She is one of the most professional, calm, and competent pilots I have ever had in my cockpit. The idea that she would be aggressive or belligerent is ludicrous." Brenda, on the other hand, he said, turning his glare on her, was visibly shaken and hostile after she realized her mistake. Her performance during the medical emergency was hesitant and ineffective. It was Naomi's calm command from the cockpit that stabilized the situation. This report is nothing more than petty, vindictive revenge. "That's your opinion, Captain," Mr. Sterling said coolly. But we have a signed witness statement. A heavy silence fell over the room. Naomi's career was hanging by a thread, swaying over a chasm of lies. Then an idea sparked in her mind. A detail. "The jet bridge," Naomi said suddenly. "Gate C34. The entrance to the jet bridge has a security camera. It's angled down the walkway. It would have recorded the entire encounter." Brenda's composure flickered for the first time. A tiny muscle in her jaw twitched. Mr. Sterling considered this. Pulling and reviewing terminal security footage is a process. "Then I suggest you start the process," Captain Henderson boomed. But before Mr. Sterling could respond, his assistant entered the room and handed him a tablet. "Sir, you asked to be alerted of any high-priority customer feedback regarding Flight 88. This just came in." Sterling looked down at the tablet. His eyebrows shot up. He read for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up, not at Naomi or Brenda, but at the HR representative. "Get Chloe Davis in here, now," he commanded. He swiveled the tablet so everyone could see. It was a lengthy email from a passenger, a man named Mr. Peterson, a high-level executive with a company that held a major corporate travel account with the airline. The email began by lavishly praising the flight crew, specifically the calm, authoritative female pilot, for their absolutely flawless handling of his severe allergic reaction. He credited her with saving his life. Then came the second half of the email. However it read, "I feel compelled to mention the deeply unprofessional conduct I witnessed from the senior flight attendant Brenda prior to boarding. While I was waiting in the priority line, I saw her verbally accost a young black woman who was clearly a member of the crew. She was condescending, dismissive, and blocked her from boarding the plane. I was shocked by her tone. I was even more shocked when I later heard that same crew member's calm voice over the intercom directing the medical response. The contrast between her professionalism under pressure and the purser's earlier petty prejudice was stark. This purser is a liability to your airline's reputation." The room was utterly silent. Mr. Peterson's email was the unseen witness, a completely impartial, high-value customer who had seen everything and corroborated Naomi's account in every damning detail. Brenda's face had turned the color of ash. She looked from the tablet to Mr. Sterling's granite-like expression. The foundation of her carefully constructed world was cracking beneath her feet. Just then, the door opened and a terrified-looking Chloe was ushered inside. She saw Naomi, the captain, Brenda, and the executives. She looked like she was about to faint. Mr. Sterling didn't mince words. "Ms. Davis, we have a signed statement from you and an email from the passenger in 4A that tells a very different story. I'm going to ask you one time, and I advise you to think very carefully about your future with this company. What happened on the jet bridge at gate C34? All eyes turned to Chloe. Brenda shot her a look of pure venom, a silent, desperate threat. But Chloe's eyes were fixed on Naomi. She saw not anger, but a quiet, weary disappointment. In that moment, the fear of Brenda was finally eclipsed by the crushing weight of her own guilt. Her voice trembled as she spoke, tears welling in her eyes. "The report. It's a lie," she choked out. "Brenda made me sign it. She threatened my job. First Officer Carter did nothing wrong. Brenda wouldn't let her on the plane because she didn't think she was a pilot. Everything the passenger wrote in that email is true. I am so sorry." The confession hung in the air, absolute and final. Brenda Jensen slumped in her chair, the fight draining out of her. There were no more lies to tell, no more corners to hide in. There was only the ugly, exposed truth and the silent, deafening judgment of the room. The reckoning had arrived. The fallout was swift and decisive. Mr. Sterling, his face a mask of cold fury, looked at Brenda. "Ms. Jensen," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "To exhibit such blatant prejudice is an embarrassment to this airline. To then falsify a formal safety report and coerce a junior colleague into lying is grounds for immediate termination. Pack your personal effects from your locker. An escort will see you out of the building. Your career with this airline is over." Brenda didn't plead or argue. She simply nodded, a hollowed-out shell of the imperious woman who had stood on the jet bridge just 2 days before. In a single moment, her 35-year career, her pride and her future had been utterly demolished, not by Naomi, but by the poison of her own making. The consequences of her actions had returned to her with the crushing force of a hard landing. Mr. Sterling then turned to Chloe, whose face was stained with tears. "Ms. Davis, your lack of integrity is deeply disappointing. However, given your eventual honesty and the coercive circumstances, you will receive a formal written reprimand and will be placed on professional probation for 1 year. Do not mistake this for leniency. Any further misstep will result in your termination. You are dismissed." Chloe nodded miserably and fled the room. Finally, Mr. Sterling faced Naomi and Captain Henderson. His entire demeanor softened. "First Officer Carter. Captain Henderson, on behalf of this airline, I offer you our most sincere and profound apology. What you were subjected to is unacceptable, and it will not be tolerated." He looked directly at Naomi. "First Officer, Your Grace, under pressure, both on the ground, when faced with ignorance, and in the air during a crisis, is exemplary. You represent the very best of this company. We are proud to have you on our flight deck." The validation was welcome, but for Naomi the feeling was more complex than simple victory. It was a profound relief, tinged with a deep sadness that this battle had ever needed to be fought at all. Weeks later, the story, stripped of names but rich in detail, had become a quiet legend among the airline's crews. Brenda Jensen was gone, a cautionary tale. Chloe Davis was flying regional routes, humbled and trying to rebuild her reputation. And Naomi Carter was exactly where she belonged. She sat in the right-hand seat of another Boeing 777, this time on a clear night halfway across the Atlantic. Captain Henderson was taking a short rest break, and she had command of the aircraft. Below a blanket of unbroken cloud reflected the moonlight, looking like a fresh field of snow. Above the sky was an impossible canopy of stars, so clear and bright they seemed close enough to touch. She thought of her grandfather, the Tuskegee Airman, who had flown through skies far more hostile than this, fighting for a country that didn't even grant him full rights on the ground. He had faced down hatred with skill and dignity. The incident with Brenda had been ugly and painful, but it had also forged something new in her, a harder resolve, a deeper understanding of the weight of the wings on her shoulders, not just the weight of the aircraft, but the weight of the progress they represented. She keyed the intercom, her voice calm and assured. "Flight attendants, we're about 20 minutes from our next waypoint. Should be smooth air for the rest of the night." She looked ahead at the endless dark horizon where the star-dusted sky met the curve of the earth. It was vast and full of promise, and she was flying straight towards it, a master of her craft, her gaze fixed firmly on her destination. 6 months had passed since the Flight 88 incident. In the corporate world of a major airline, 6 months was long enough for a scandal to fade from memory, but it was also long enough for its consequences to set like concrete. For Brenda Jensen, it had meant forced retirement and a quiet, ignominious disappearance from the industry she had once lorded over. For Naomi Carter, the effects were more complex and far-reaching. She was no longer just a highly competent first officer. She had become a symbol. The story, though officially contained, had spread through the airline's internal grapevine, morphing into a near legend. New flight attendants spoke of it in hushed tones during training. Ground crews gave her a knowing nod of respect. Other pilots, particularly women and people of color, who had long endured the quiet hum of systemic bias, saw her as a champion. Naomi hadn't asked for the role, and at times she found its weight uncomfortable. She had lunch with Mr. Sterling once a month now, an informal meeting where he sought her perspective on new company-wide inclusion initiatives. He was serious about change, and he saw Naomi as a vital real-world litmus test for his policies. While she was grateful for the seat at the table, A part of her yearned for the simple anonymity of the flight deck to be judged solely by her altitude headings and landing capabilities. This evening, she was deadheading from JFK Chicago O'Hare to start a new trip rotation. Flying as a passenger in her own airline's uniform always felt strange, but tonight she was in civilian clothes, a pair of smart trousers and a silk blouse, hoping to blend in. She settled into her business class seat, beclosed her eyes, and tried to mentally prepare for the week of flying ahead. "Can I get you something to drink before we depart?" The voice was quiet, hesitant, and eerily familiar. Naomi's eyes snapped open. Standing in the aisle holding a silver tray was Chloe Davis. The change in her was stark. The bright-eyed, slightly naive optimism was gone, replaced by a weary caution. She was thinner, and there were shadows under her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite conceal. The moment their eyes met, Chloe's face went pale. The tray in her hands rattled the glasses, clinking together like a nervous chime. For a terrifying second, Naomi thought Chloe was going to drop the entire thing. Chloe froze her training and her past colliding in a paralyzing moment of panic. This was her first month back on a mainline route after 5 months of flying punishingly early regional hops between dreary, forgotten cities, her penance. Seeing Naomi Carter sitting there felt like a final cruel test from the universe. Naomi had a choice. She could have offered a cold professional nod and turned away, leaving Chloe to stew in her anxiety. It's what she might have done 6 months ago. But the incident, her conversations with Mr. Sterling, and her long hours of reflection on her grandfather's legacy had changed her perspective. She was no longer just reacting to the world. She was beginning to understand she had a small part in shaping it. "Hello, Chloe," Naomi said, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the younger woman's panic. "I'll just have a water, please. No ice." The simple, calm request seemed to break the spell. Chloe swallowed hard, her professionalism kicking in like a life raft. "Of course, ma'am," she whispered, her hands still trembling as she poured the water. She placed it on Naomi's tray table, her movements stiff and awkward. She couldn't meet Naomi's eyes. As she began to turn away, Naomi spoke again. "Chloe, wait." Chloe stopped her, back still to Naomi. She looked like a soldier awaiting a sentence. "Look at me," Naomi said, not as a command, but as a quiet invitation. Slowly, Chloe turned around. Her eyes were shimmering with unshed tears. Chloe started, her voice cracking. "I never got the chance to. I'm so sorry. Not just for signing that paper, for being a coward. What Brenda did was horrible, but what I did was worse. I knew it was a lie, and I let her threaten me into being a part of it. I could have destroyed your career. There is no excuse for what I did, and I have thought about it every single day." The confession tumbled out of her in a raw, desperate rush. It was the apology she had clearly been rehearsing in her mind for half a year. Naomi listened, her expression unreadable. She let the silence hang for a moment after Chloe finished, letting the weight of the words settle. "No," Naomi said finally. "What you did wasn't worse." Chloe looked up, confused. "What Brenda did came from a place of malice and hate." Naomi explained, her voice low and steady, so only Chloe could hear. "She wanted to hurt me. What you did came from a place of fear. They are not the same thing, Chloe. Fear makes people do terrible things, weak things. I understand fear." She paused, then held Chloe's gaze. "The important thing is what you did after you were afraid. You sat in that room in front of Mr. Sterling and you told the truth. That took a different kind of courage, the kind that matters." A single tear escaped Chloe's eye and traced a path down her cheek. The immense burden of guilt she had been carrying seemed to lessen its sharp edges, softened by Naomi's unexpected grace. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was something more valuable. It was understanding. "Thank you," Chloe whispered, the words thick with emotion. She wiped her eye with the back of her hand. "I am trying to be better, to be braver." "Good," Naomi said with a small nod. "That's all any of us can do. Now go on. You have other passengers to take care of. Chloe managed a small, watery smile. For the rest of the flight, she was the model of professionalism. But every time she passed Naomi's seat, there was a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding that a painful chapter had finally been closed. When the plane landed at O'Hare and the passengers began to deplane, Naomi gathered her things. As she passed Chloe standing by the door, she paused for a moment. "Keep flying safe, Chloe," she said quietly. "You too." "First officer," Chloe replied, her voice steady and clear for the first time. Naomi walked off the jet bridge and into the bustling terminal, the encounter leaving a thoughtful calm in its wake. She felt lighter. As she headed towards the crew transit area, she passed a large floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the tarmac. Standing there, her face pressed against the glass, was a young black girl, no older than 10, watching a Boeing 787 push back from the gate. Her eyes were wide with the kind of pure, unadulterated awe that Naomi remembered feeling herself. The girl's father stood behind her, and he pointed towards a uniformed female pilot walking past. "See, honey," he said. "Just like we talked about. Pilots can look like anybody. They can even look like you." The little girl looked from the pilot back to the airplane, her expression transformed from simple awe into a look of dawning possibility. Naomi stopped and watched them for a moment unseen. A warm, profound sense of purpose washed over her. She finally understood. The weight of her wings wasn't a burden. It was a lever, and her job wasn't just to fly the plane ahead of her, but to help clear the skies for the generations who were watching from the ground, waiting for their own chance to soar. Thank you for listening to this story. What happened to Naomi Carter is a reflection of a challenge many people, especially women of color, face every single day in professions where they defy outdated expectations. Her story is one of quiet strength, undeniable competence, and the ultimate triumph of character over prejudice. The actions of Brenda were not just a simple mistake. They were a cascade of choices rooted in bias, escalated by pride, and ultimately shattered by the truth. This narrative reminds us that real authority isn't about a uniform or a title. It's about integrity, skill, and how you behave when the pressure is on. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. And please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a situation like this? Let's talk about it. Thank you for being here.